Sure.
Okay, all right.
You're going to need every minute anyway,
Yeah,
Stu.
Yeah, you want to, by the way, a lot of you folks are folks that I've known for a long, long time, and you've been in the community for quite a while. So I think some of the stuff that we're going to talk about should be interesting from that perspective. You want to go to the next slide? Okay, so let me just provide a little bit of context about the talk. We had in terms of, we had a thing called Star Labs that was about 6 or 7 years ago in the Valley. It was all around technology and organization. And what came out of that was a bunch of papers, but about 2 years ago, I started writing a monograph on technology and organization. And I got involved in the Stanford Human-Centered AI program and started talking to those folks. And I was asked to write a book chapter, which I wrote on human-centered AI maturity model. And then I was also asked to do a keynote at ODF. And as a result of that, the chapter and the keynote put together a bunch of slides. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. But there's some additional information there. And then the human-centered AI group at Stanford and Google, the DeepMind group, came together and they made a request for research proposals on taking a look at the organization of the future in a human-centered AI environment. And so myself and Bill Passmore and Chris Worley submitted a proposal, and they're going to have probably 100 of them, and they're going to choose about 5 or 6 to present. We feel that we have a pretty good shot at to make it through the first round at least. So as a result, we've been thinking about these issues quite a bit. My intention is for you guys to leave with a little bit more knowledge of human-centered AI and also the implications for the roundtable. I think most of you know who I am. I've been around in the community for quite a long time. I started off managing the human factors group at Lockheed way back when. We had worked on the space shuttle and the space telescope. Somebody gave me a whole bunch of material on socio-technical design, and we started using that, and it worked out really well. And then I got recruited to go to a place called the American Productivity Center, which was a high altitude place. And we worked on the steel industry, the chemical industry, airlines industry, White House, all sorts of stuff. And I did a lot of STS back then, and we got fantastic results on new startups and redesigns. As a result, I got recruited to come back to the Silicon Valley and manage Hewlett-Packard's Factory of the Future program and their product development. I had all the centralized software development stuff. We worked on time to market and all that other kind of, all that kind of stuff. And I used a lot of social technical design work back then. And then I left after about 15 years there. I left and started a firm about a block off the Stanford campus. And we did a lot of, I worked mainly with Jay Galbraith. He and I worked for about 10 years or more together. And we also had my R&D manager. We started an innovation firm. So we did a lot of innovation work, a lot of Tushman's kind of stuff in the Valley and elsewhere. So we had 2 firms. One was a design firm for organization, and the other one was an innovation firm. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, what we're going to do, I have a lot of slides, too many slides, and well, I'm going to have to talk fast going through all of these. And I have 3 sections. One is technology, organization, modern organization, human-centered AI, and then we get into human-centered AI and org design and evolution. And then a lot of applications that are beginning to emerge now are in there. And after each of these different sections, we'll stop and just have kind of a discussion. My idea is to go pretty fast and get the big picture. And the idea is that if you can get the big picture from all of these slides, then we can, at another time, we can drill deep in any of these things that we talk about. But it's very important to have kind of a large systems mental model. And that's kind of what I want to try to do now with this presentation. Okay, let's go to the first section. Technology and organization. Next slide. You know, as most of you probably are aware, technology has always been the driver of major change around the world, and all of that can be codified, starting with the Industrial Revolution. And there's some common patterns when technology it shapes organizational outcomes. You have these dominant designs that are accepted as the new sort of technical standard and configuration. And after a period of lots of experimentation, you get this dominant design. What happens is, after you get the dominant design, the whole industry, everybody starts moving more towards that dominant design, and you get a period of discontinuous change. Those patterns, those dominant design patterns, have happened over time, and we're in one now. We're starting one now. So the AI dominant design is creating a huge amount of discontinuity because the organizations have always been designed around the dominant design, the previous dominant design. Now, one of the things that's going on now that's really important to understand is that the technology is moving much faster than the organization, the social system. We have a technology lead, social system lag issue, and that's increasing at a much faster rate. So the organizations and the human systems are persisting in the face of their unadaptiveness, with technology constantly changing at a fast rate. What we need, and what's happening right now, and what's in progress in terms of some of the tech companies and some of the research that's going on, is to figure out a co-evolutionary model between technology and organization, which is a model of reconfigurability. So as the technology changes, the organization changes at the same time. Okay, next slide. You know, this kind of shows a graph that we did in a paper after this big study we did. And, you know, what we noticed is that the Valley was way ahead of everybody else around the world in terms of organizational models, because they were already experimenting with different organizational models to match the technology. In fact, you go to the next slide. You know, we got all these folks, Google and Microsoft and Nike and Deutsche Bank and IBM. We got all these people in an action research project for a couple years, and we looked at all these issues, and some of the stuff I'm talking about are some of the results that came out of this study. And that's what got me pretty much interested in the technology organizational relationship. Okay, next slide. Yeah, now we did the STAR Labs, Socio-Technical Action Research Labs, and we came up with all sorts of interesting findings. And because of time, I won't go through all of these, but essentially the organization information is being decentralized. The operating model now is becoming the organization. The hierarchical structure that we've always had is really becoming out of date. Control and coordination is really being decentralized to teams, or what I would call work systems. And you have a much more progressive data-based open systems model where you're getting data from customers and from Delta with competitors and all sorts of other things. So let's go to the next slide. So what's happening is that this term modern organization is kind of out there right now. I'm sure it will start changing into a more term, but the modern organization is really substituting for the traditional organization that we've had around for millions of years, which is the hierarchical structure and siloed departments. And the new sort of modern organization that's emerging right now is a combination of advanced technology and organizational capabilities. It's the integration of technology and these new organizational capabilities. Technology, data, people, and organization are starting to come together to create this reconfigurable organization. Next slide. Yeah, these four components are really creating these new models, and the organizational design, at least some of the academics, have finally come around after about 50 years, and they're basically saying the most prominent model in this operating model are going to be these, what they call microstructures, which guess what, are essentially work systems. Microstructures are these work systems. So really what's happening now is the organization is moving more towards the operating model. The operating model now is a dominant part of the organization. A good example is Tesla. You know, if you take a look at Tesla, they'll have a work system. They'll have a bunch of people working. As they're working, there'll be a big screen in front of them. They can talk to the screen. They can get data from the screen. If they do some, if they have variances and they start improving, making improvements, they can get data on those improvements and get the analytics out of it. Let's say that they make an improvement and they need $500,000 funding to be able to implement that improvement. They can go right to the screen, ask what the ROI is. If the ROI is good, the data will say, go ahead and we'll allocate the money, and you could use that money to be able to make the change in the organization. Historically, what Elon Musk is doing is basically saying we can't have middle management, higher management making all these decisions. It slows up the throughput process, and it slows up the process. So we got to have decisions and data. The data that these work systems are getting is the same data that the executives are getting. So everything is getting decentralized into a more work system design operating model. Next slide. So let's talk about human-centered. Bill Passmore, I don't know if you guys know Bill, but he's a colleague of mine, and we do a lot of work together. And he basically just made this comment quite a while ago, but he just says, you know, AI is just going to change the way that we even think about organizations, and that's happening very, very quickly. Next slide. So what's emerged out of this, which is great, is called human-centered AI. And there's AI and human-centered AI. A lot of AI is being implemented across the country across the world, actually, to reduce headcount, make more efficiency. But the dominant model that's emerging at this point, at least with some of the tech, and I know Google and Microsoft, we've been doing some work at Microsoft, is human-centered AI. That's becoming the model, and I hope that becomes the dominant model. Next slide. I won't go into all the details here because we just don't have a lot of time, but basically human-centered AI is saying whenever you have AI, you're doing it with humans, and humans and the human condition and human ethics and human values, and building collaborative systems between humans and AI is where we need to go as a society, and also where we need to go competitiveness. The data is that if you can link joint optimization with humans in implementing AI, the performance is much, much better. Here's some of the guiding principles around human-centered AI. And I have a paper I can send out to you guys if you want that has more detail on all of this, but there's things like user control and empowerment, always transparency, all the ethical alignment, user experience. Next slide. User experience is figured out, human augmentation and collaboration, accountability, sustainability. There's usually a governance structure in these companies. Microsoft we were talking to Microsoft, they're putting one in, Google has one. The governance structure is essentially saying you want to have humans and technology working together, and we're gonna manage that, and we're gonna make sure that we don't get into a position where AI is managing people. People always have to manage AI. Next slide. Okay, I'll just stop real quick. Any kind of comments about what we've just talked about before we move on?
So, Stu, how is that story you told about Tesla a good example of human-centered AI? It sounded like people were looking at a screen was making some computing behind the screen was making a decision, and then people could move ahead. Is that human-centered?
Well, actually, that example came out a little bit before I got into all the human-centered AI. So, I mean, it's a really good question. But the idea is that if that was happening, if we go down there today, you would probably see that work system that's total redesign in terms of an AI work system. But those individuals would still be able to talk to the screen, and the screen would be able to do the calculations that's needed. So I think that is AI in that example very well is AI, a human-centered AI with a work system.
Yeah, another Stu, another aspect is, including Tesla and Meta, these companies are laying off people by the hundreds, and they are citing AI improving efficiency, and therefore they don't need people. So, in the same breath, we talk about HCAI. How is AI supporting humans if humans don't have jobs,
Well, I'm totally with you. I'm very close to a lot of folks in the Valley, and I can go on a long rant about this, but essentially there's huge amounts of venture capital money going to these startups. A lot of these startups are Stanford students that have dropped out to be able to do startups. There's a gold rush because what AI does, it takes any kind of process, particularly a knowledge process, and can automate a large part of that process. Not all of it, but a large part of it. So if you got 10 people, there might be 2 left. And what these organizations are doing, these startups, is they're taking different processes of organizations, financial processes, operating processes, and they're automating with AI, and then they're going to sell them worldwide. And that's what the startups are doing. Those things will probably hit the ground running, I would say, in another 2 years. And I think what's going to happen is what you're saying, and that is that we're going to have a huge amount of displacement in the world because AI is going to take a lot of those jobs. Now, having said that, there's still this other counter movement going on with human-centered AI. The problem is that if you get on a Zoom conversation with a bunch of executives, they're just looking at the cost reductions of AI. There are those that are looking at the human-centered piece because there's the new competitive model that's emerging in the minds of Microsoft and Google is that the competitive landscape will be a function of creativity and innovation. In other words, once everybody starts having AI as steady state, the differentiation is going to be how you can innovate and be creative. And that's a human task. So part of the design and the call for papers and the call, particularly with deep minds, is how do you create a work system that has a lot of innovation and creativity through humans in the integration with AI. And the last thing I'll say that will freak you out is that some of the language that I'm hearing is that because of the displacement of people, there could be the need to design a new society. In other words, particularly a financial system that there would be money for everybody because there'll be so many people out of work. And that would be a whole restructuring of a society social structure. But listen, I better get going if we're going to get through all these slides.
Okay.
Next.
I would like to mention a little aspect from the European perspective. And I would cordially invite you and all the other participants to discuss that at Berlin 2026 at the annual meeting, and that will be in September next year.
Sure.
Since we are struggling with the EU AI Act and the huge discussion in the American government and so on about regulation. And the EU AI Act is risk-based, as a risk assessment, as a risk assessment from the European community. If things would go in the direction you mentioned, Stu, there would be far less risks. But the experience with technology development is that the catastrophes came before regulation. So I would hope that you are right, but my tendency is a little bit from the European experience to go on the other perspective.
Yeah, the social system, including policy change, is lagging behind the technology. That's one of the problems. And the other problem is that we had Biden, who was very, very bullish on human-centered AI. And then this guy called Trump got into office and he just killed it all. Just supporting a much more efficiency-oriented system. So we got problems about all that. And a year from now, I don't know where we'll be. But the good news is that, you know, with Stanford and other places and Google and others, they're still focused on developing systems that are much more productive. And they're betting on the fact that you're going to need more creative and innovation in the long run when AI becomes more steady state. Okay, let's move to the next piece. Well, so there's these human-centered, and by the way, folks, I'm not going to go through the details of this because you can get the slides later and look at it, you know, but there's a bunch of practices that have organizational impact, like user research. If you're in there doing design, you're going to do user research and engagement. You're going to do a lot of iterative design. There's these ethical AI frameworks that you'll constantly adhere to, the criteria to it. It has to be transparent. Next slide. You know, you'll be building a lot of cross-functional structures. You got cross-functional structures are going to increase dramatically. They'll be, you know, it will be designed for continuous learning and adaptation. So all of these parts of the work system will be in place in human-centered AI. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's talk about organization design real quick. There's historically been in the United States 2 streams of organization design. One has been strategic organization design, which is a top-down process and begins with strategy and it's applied at the enterprise. And Jay Galbraith, I worked for 10 or 15 years very closely with Jay Galbraith. In fact, he and I were working together at Cisco and Yahoo when he said to me, you know, it's really weird. They have 5th generation technology and 2nd generation organizational models. And that's what started this whole process of the Action Research Project. But the problem is I worked with him and every time we would do these sort of post-McKinsey redesigns, we would come in after McKinsey and do large system enterprise designs. We would end up with new org charts. But when I would do a social technical system design, we'd end up with performance improvement. And I became very biased because if I wanted to improve the performance of the system, I would always look at the social technical approach as compared to a strategic organization design approach. So the field of organization design is at a crossroads right now, at least in America. Okay, next slide. So let's take a look at social technical and human-centered. A human-centered AI and STS, they're related. They're fundamentally a human-centered AI system is a social technical system. It is a social technical system. And I've talked to some of the scholars in the field and they all agree. They're both oriented towards achieving joint optimization between humans and technology. Okay, let's move to the next slide. I'm going to talk fast because we got a lot to do here. But, you know, here's a, you know, all of you have been around, you know, in the 40s, we had our industrial STS community, industrial roots, you know, around 1970, you know, we had folks on organization. That's when we were doing startups, new startups and redesigns. Then in the 80s and 90s, I remember when I was at HP, the technical system was no longer manufacturing. It was the product development and order fulfillment process. So we started using social technical design in that areas. We started using CalPAVA's deliberation process as a new unit of analysis. You know, we started using user-centered design. So things changed in the 80s and 90s. And then of course, in around 2000, with Agile, we started working on more digital ecosystems, network structures. I got some papers on that. I'm sure many of you have papers on that too. So you can see the evolution from the 40s all the way to 2010 of how STS has evolved. Next slide. And the present is really human-centered AI. That's really sort of the next step. So we're really into the next stage of social technical design, which is human-centered AI. And that's and when we talk about AI, we're talking about a technology that comes in and makes the data go faster. You can get data faster. You can redesign processes by eliminating steps in the processes. And as you're going to see later, you can actually have AI to actually manage and monitor the process in terms of variances. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, this is another sort of slide of where we are now. This is the sort of the different stages. Let's go to the next slide. This is really, in my opinion, an inflection point for the STS community. Technology and organization, I said it was timelessly relevant. In other words, it's always going to be an issue. In that sense, social technical design is always going to be here because now it's even more front and center. The world is once again grappling with a relationship between technology work and human beings. And, artificial intelligence, AI, automation, digital are reshaping organizations and societies at a scale not seen before. And that's going to be increasing. But the last bullet here is that the community and its visibility has not kept pace with the changing technological and academic landscape. The community, as well as the system, has been lagging. In my opinion, we need to reframe STS for today's challenges. The language and the framing is historical and somewhat industrial based. And we need to start talking about STS in some clever way so we can link STS to the contemporary research that's being happening and start using some of the vocabulary that's happening. So it could be an attractor for people to be recruited into the STS community. Next slide. So I think the communities should start taking a look at human-centered AI and start adopting that as becoming experts and practitioners in that world. And you're going to use STS and human-centered AI interchangeably, but you're going to start using the language that's being used in human-centered AI when you do designs and when you do case studies and all of that. So you can start bringing that language into the field. Okay, next slide. Okay, just some discussion on this. Any comments?
I think you're right on. But speaking the language that the business is the only way you're going to influence them, right?
Yeah.
Well, Stu, we're also doing work when I do training on AI for Good, which is I've just got done at the World Conference in Ghana for AI for Good in organization development, focusing on the use of self, which has been around forever. Every person has a head, a heart, a body, and a soul. When we compare AI's capability in those four quadrants, what becomes very clear is that in the head quadrant, just like when we do decision accelerators, when we have people on the floor, see where they're at in those four dimensions, there's incredible capability for humans in the areas that they have not been in because organizations have been primarily left hemisphere.
Bill, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, and it's good to see you.
You too.
But we're going to talk about that because that seems to be where a new approach is to be able to really leverage AI currently in our next piece here.
Great.
Stu, if I'm understanding you, you're saying that we as a community have to go through a process of change, a community of organization designers, community of socio-technical thinkers, and that we sometimes are looking out from ourselves to the AI people and saying that there's a problem there. Perhaps are you saying that the problem is maybe more so with us and our rigidity.
Yeah, what I'm saying, Pete, is that there's a big gold mine sitting there right in front of everybody that's in the STS community. Now you can go in there and mine that gold, or you can persist in the same thing we've been doing for 40 years.
Yeah.
The conditions are perfect right now. When I go talk to my computer science friends, my engineering friends, my academic research friends, they use the word social technical design. They know what social technical, but they don't use it as a driver. They use it in concert with all the other things that are going on with human-centered AI. If the social technical community doesn't kill, reframes its image, reframes the discussion points, reframes the kind of papers it writes, it's in a perfect position to be able to get lots of people to become a strange attractor, lots of people coming to the community. Now's a perfect time to do that. In the next 12 months, 30, next year and a half, you should do that. You should be, the roundtable should be the place that you go in order to learn the latest in organizational strategy and design with new technology. And I think it's a perfect time to do that.
I find that now the craziness of the world right now is an opportunity in that every client I've worked with that's actually made significant changes in how they look at things, it came out of a crisis. It wasn't from having the ideas, it was having a crisis that broke things apart so we couldn't do them the normal way.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering is, are there some organizations that are suffering enough now, that are crazy enough now, to stop with the old who are the stakeholders as in top-down version of that, and start looking at what Socio-Technical claims is the stakeholders from outward in, to look at the broader communities, not just the ones that we're hiring? And I just wonder, are there examples of that are big time? I have some little time ones, but not big time ones.
There's a lot of small examples of that all around the world, I think, right now, of smaller initiatives. But a lot of these companies are restructuring their entire organization. I mean, I spent some time with Microsoft, and that fundamentally, in fact, we're going to talk about it if we got time here. They're oriented towards this operating model. It's going to be a high performance operating model. It's all human-centered AI. I better get going if we're going to get, are we past our time or could we keep talking?
Can I ask one more question, please?
Yeah.
To have a woman speaking as well here. I wondered, you were speaking about optimization and the need for change of language. And I'm always quite reluctant to conflate, or perhaps not conflate, but to use human-centered AI in the same way as I would when I talk about joint optimization or socio-technical systems, because I think we're losing a lot, given that there are so many different dimensions and that it goes so much further than the human. And I wondered how we can arrive at a more nuanced language, and perhaps finding a new term of not human-centered AI, but bringing in, for instance, the ecological or the socio-psychological as well in there.
I think you can. And I think that the people who are in the driver's seat in the human-centered AI world are very open to that. They're really encouraging, and they want the people in the organizational field to get in there and start working with them, and they're very sympathetic to social technical design principles. So I think the stage is centered to be able to do that. Let me move on a little bit farther, because this last piece may address some of these are some of the applications that are emerging right now in the human-centered AI world. And I'm going to go through these pretty fast, but the idea is it will give you an idea of some of the paradigm shifts that are happening in social technical design, in the field of social technical design. And you can see some of the shifts that are going to be occurring when you take a look at some of these new examples. So the first thing, the AI-powered operating model, let's go to the next. When I was working with the Microsoft people, they were very bullish on this, but this is interesting. If you take a look at the definition of an operating model from Bain or McKinsey or Deloitte or any of these folks, they all say one thing in common. The operating model is essentially there to be able to align the critical components of people, technology, and data. The operating model, its primary purpose is to get the alignment and the fit of all of these things in service of strategy. So just think about that. And so an alignment, it's getting fit. I hope that word resonates with you because the whole organizational design world is based on getting alignment and fit. So let's go to the next. So the whole idea is getting continuous alignment, something between people, processes, structures, and information and technology. And that's the new operating model. Let's see, what else do I have here? Yeah, okay. It's basically bringing all that stuff together. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to go down a road here that all of you are pretty much familiar with, but I'm going to do that in order to provide a base. If we look at organization as a system, there's inputs, there's outputs, there's a customer, and there's a conversion transformation process. Next slide. And of course, on that system, if you want to make it a smart system, if it can learn, then what you do is you have feedback loops. You have feedback loops in terms of performance and feedback loops in terms of users and customers. And usually that involves members of the ecosystem, and that goes back to the input side. So now you have an intelligent system that could learn and change. Next slide. On top of that, we're going to put a bunch of humans. We got people. The unit of analysis could be an individual, it could be a team, it could be a department, it could be a function, it could be an organization, it could be an industry, it could be a country. So the unit of analysis could be some human system, and then you got a management system on top of that and all the functions on top of that. And below that is, in the conversion, there's mistakes that happen that we call variances. Those are problems. If you eliminate the variances, and the system's performance will improve. Next slide. So what we've all done, no, back one slide. So what we've done, as you know, is you push down capability down towards the people closest to the variances, and then they get empowered, and you give them what they need in order to improve the performance of the system. Next slide. So the real issue with work systems, when you put in these work systems, because this system is a work system, it's you know, when the agile model has been implemented, the agile model, I talked to some of my academic friends and they're saying, oh, we're going to eliminate STS in what we're teaching because we have agile models. Well, agile models don't substitute for social technical systems. Most of them don't have all the properties that are required as a social technical system. This would be a work system, for example, where you have all these components and how it works. Now, if you go to the next slide, when I go into a system in a work system, all of these structural properties need to be in place. If none of the structural properties in place, the system doesn't work very well. So the first thing I do is I make sure all the pieces are in place. And then what happens is if there's any variances between technology and people, process and people, process and technology, or any of the variances, those variances become the things that we try to eliminate so we get this work system to work much more effectively. That's sort of the work system model. Now, just that work system model, we're going to come back to it a little bit later. Okay, next slide. The model that we've been talking about, that I've been talking about to some of these folks, and that we've done some work in, there's this thing called deliberations, and I'm not going to get into it in detail. Many of you know about deliberations. It's a unit of analysis when you're having a group of people, typically cross-functional people, talk to each other and come up with some type of decision. And in the AI world, decision-making is going to be absolutely critical in this new world because of the information that we have. Next slide. We have been putting together in a design lab that we've done for quite a long time, and that design lab, it keeps improving and getting better and better. And essentially what it is a room that people go into, and you have AI technology and you have individuals. And those individuals usually are cross-functional in nature. And there's an org design practitioner that leads the session. And the session is based on rapid prototyping and rapid problem solving, and then testing the outputs. Next slide. You know, you have a configuration. This is an older design of a configuration of a room. But one of the things that we're suggesting to Google and these folks is that they build these labs that you go in, and essentially what it is a socio-technical lab where you have perfect conditions to be able to problem solve, test, and implement through sprints, rapid iteration, 10, 30, 60, 10, 30, 10, 20, 30, 30, 60, 90-day sort of sprints. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm going to get into a next, another thing that's happening called flash teams. Over at Stanford right now as we speak, there's a couple researchers, Melissa Valentine. I know Melissa, she was in our research study. She's in the operations research department. She's not in the business school. She does OB, but she does it from the management engineering operations research. And then Bernstein is in computer science. But essentially, they've come up with, they have a book coming out in about a month with some strong research behind it that I think is significant. They're calling it flash teams. I don't like the term flash teams. And there's another term for it in the next slide. Next slide, which are hybrid work systems. And these are social technical systems. And these work systems are very interesting. Go to the next slide. What the work systems do, and this is very important to think about. First thing it does is that it can notify people all around the world. So in other words, what's the word? Go back a slide. I'm forgetting the word right now. Go back one more slide. Yeah, crowdsourcing. Okay, now go back to the slide that we had. They have developed an expert crowdsourcing model, and this is something that all of you should think about. They're predicting that a lot of the work systems in the future and organizations in the future will be crowdsourced. In other words, you can develop organizations where you have one guy in Afghanistan, you have another guy in New York, you have another guy in Canada, you have another guy in South America, and they could all be on the same work system, the same team. The reason why they do that is because that work system model that I showed earlier that has those 14 points, that's now going to be a digital work system. In other words, they've codified that to be a digital work system so that all of the data that you would have in terms of variances, alignment, are going to be done digitally in this AI system. So now what you have is you have people around the world in the system, and then you have a digital system that can reconfigure very, very fast. It's not a manual system like we've had in the past. That allows the system to reconfigure very, very quickly. And they can reconfigure these design teams, these work systems, by technically and also through the communication, the social system design, the communication and the collaboration models that they have with the people that are located at different locations. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So these flash teams are essentially social technical systems. So the good news is that this new emerging technology and model is a social technical design. And the question is, who's going to go in there and design these things? And this is what I think part of the roundtable needs to do. They need to be involved in this kind of work. Next slide. There was a recent article that came out in Fast Company recently that talked about the AI automation engineers. Next slide. These engineers are located in these work systems, and what they do is they identify variances. And then what they do is they use the AI-powered workflows and the AI-powered work design and humans, and they eliminate the variances. The goal is to create measurable improvements that free up humans and workers and creates creativity, strategy, and collaboration for people. That term, I want to go back, that term right now is being referred to as an engineering term. That's a term that I think should be the role of the social technical designer, part of the role. You have one foot on the manipulation of this AI-based technology work system, and then you have another hand in with the human system and making sure the collaboration and the creativity is strong with the collaboration. Okay, next slide. Okay, when I wrote the paper and started doing this stuff, I started putting together a social technical design model because that's what I'm used to. I've done a lot of this in organizations. I've done a typical organizational design and they've come out pretty good. So I've used that with human-centered AI, and I'll go through that, but I'll go through that very quickly. And by the way, I know you're going to feel weird because I'm going through it very quickly, but you can have all these slides and you can have the paper that I wrote that has more detail about all this stuff. But essentially, what I'm calling a human-centered AI STD, social technical design, here's the definition. It's an organizational architecture that brings together people, processes, information, data, and technology, which we talked about earlier, in a manner that optimizes the alignment and fit among them in order to produce high performance and meet the strategy in terms of an evolving business model and an effective response to customers' adaptation to environmental demands and opportunities. Okay, next slide. So the steps essentially have 4 steps. Entry, sanction, and startup, which all of you have done redesign work. That's essentially the first step that you always take. Then you go in and you do an analysis, technical analysis, social system design, organizational analysis. Then that gives you all the data you need to redesign the system, and then you implement it. Next slide. So these are some of the steps that you do in the early, entry, sanction, and startup of that work system. And remember, this is a work system that doesn't have AI. What this is all about is working with the AI technologist in the implementation of AI into the social system to create a human-centered AI organization. So you have entry, sanction, startup. Next slide. Is that you do the research, you do the technical system analysis, and then you do the social system analysis. Next slide. So the technical system analysis, a lot of it is very similar to what we've done before, but there's some changes to that. Next slide. Social system analysis. The big thing about social system analysis that's different in the AI world is you conducted a tremendous amount of user-centered research, user-centered design. You're getting people involved continuously and using them as the criteria to see if the AI system works. If you're working with somebody and they say, I don't like this because it takes away my imagination, then you say to the technologist, did you hear that? You don't want to take away their imagination. You want to be able to, let's design it. Let's design the technology so you keep that. So what you do is you create the optimization with this analysis and these tools. Next slide. The design part of it is the design lab. As you take all the data that you collect in the analysis, you get in the design lab. The design lab has all these advanced AI tools, along with cross-functional people, meaning people from the ecosystem, typically customers and maybe experts are in there. So it's not just the work system. You have a broader work system, particularly, like I said, customers. A lot of this is done co-creation with customers, as well as co-creation with members of the ecosystem. Next slide. So, you know, in the design, what you're doing is taking all the data and designing the new work system, and you're having a lot of rapid prototyping and using and testing the prototypes with users, testing the prototypes with strategy. Next slide. Then you got to work on systems integration, which is essentially making sure all the pieces fit, all the pieces align. And you know, the primary focus is to make sure that humans are in control. Okay, next slide. You know, then you got to design the organization with HR, and that is creating the work systems, creating the roles and responsibilities. The most important thing in these models is to create the cross-functional linkages, because whenever there's variances or problems or opportunities or innovations, it always involves cross-functional people. You got to get their voice. Now, the other problem, I won't get into this too much, but the problem is that the good news is what the lab does is it builds social capital. The bad news is AI kills social capital. So what I mean by that is that AI, you have you and AI with all the information you need, but you don't talk to people. You can't have that. You got to have people that are constantly talking with each other, which essentially are cross-functional people. They got to communicate, they got to talk, they got to understand the technology, and the technology needs to work for them. Next slide. Then, you know, there's a whole implementation slide, and the most important thing here is to put user feedback loops in the system. Why? Because you remember the first slide I showed in this deck? If you want a new world where technology and organizations change at the same time, where they co-evolve at the same time, and you don't have a strategy structure or technology lead social system lag problem, the way that you do that and manage that is through continuous feedback loops. Feedback loops are absolutely critical between the technical and social system. Next slide. Okay. Discussion. Well, let me do this. Go to the next slide. Oh, the maturity model. Okay. I'm going to go through the maturity model before we have a discussion. Let's go through the maturity model real quick. Next slide. Again, I'm not going to go through this in detail because if you request the paper I wrote, it's all about the maturity model. It's got a lot of detail. But the notion about the maturity model is that if you're a company and you're going to implement AI and you're using a social technical design process to implement AI, you need a way to measure your implementation process. And that's what a maturity model does. It helps teams understand where they are, identifies the gaps. It helps you improve over time. So if you go to the next slide, you have this 5-step. Well, the maturity model turns HCs from a concept to a concrete, scalable strategy. That's what the maturity model, that's the role of the maturity model. So the next slide is you could have these different levels, like level 1 initial, level 2, all the way to level 4 manage, and level 5 optimization. As you go through these levels, there are standards and criteria that could tell you if you've met that level. So if you go to level 1, for example, on the next slide, you know, there's a lot of odd hack practices. People don't even know what you're talking about when you say human-centered AI. They're freaked out about AI. There's no feedback loops in place. So you complete a readiness assessment. You start in building awareness and you start identifying the value of user involvement. And there's a bunch of tools and techniques that you do to be able to do that. You go to the second stage and you're starting to get the users involved. You're starting to implement the social technical analysis to get the data that you need. You're using use cases. You're alerting, increasing awareness and knowledge of what AI is all about to the organization. Next slide. So in this slide, what you're doing is you're starting to use a design lab. You've done the analysis. You put the thing in the design lab. There's a bunch of standards and practices that are criteria and metrics for this stage, and it can kind of tell you where you are in your journey. You're about halfway through your journey. Next level is a managed stage. Now you got these systems in place. You need to manage them and get the results that you want. You need to have the steering committee, the AI governance structure in place to make sure that everything is ethical. And then, of course, the next stage is optimizing. You're one of the best companies in the world in terms of optimizing AI in your system, and it's totally integrated into your organization. Okay, next slide. So these are the 5. The paper talks about the 5 levels, but these are the 5 levels that we just talked about. Next slide. Thank you very much. And the next slide. Whoops. Okay. Yeah, go to my slide that has my email on it. Can you do that? Go back a little bit.
This one.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you guys, any of you guys want the slides or the paper, then contact me at my email address. And I'll send it to you. Okay, any conversation, any comments, questions?
Overwhelming.
Well, I think one question might be for everybody, and this is I think is important for the roundtable as a support mechanism for the community of people interested in human agency and technical design relative to adaptive organizations, would be one of the topics that Stu's mentioned here, whether it be around design labs, reconfigurability, whether it be around the work system model. What of these topics might you want to delve into more deeply? Because really, we did scratch the surface of so much of the big picture that Stu and the mental model that Stu wanted to share. What would you like to dig into more deeply? Because I think that might give us some guidance as to how we might build on what Stu's presented to us.
If you went to a roundtable meeting, what would you like to see?
So what I'd like to see are case studies of where we're doing this already.
Right. Exactly.
And those of us out here who are experimenting with it have those.
Right. Thanks, Bill.
What I would like to see is greater clarity about what do we actually mean by AI in this entire discussion. I thought most of what Stu talked about was inspiring, interesting, very worthwhile, but most of it wasn't really about AI.
Right.
And wasn't really about something that was discernibly HCAI. Like, for instance, I could easily imagine people in Europe who are in the BPM community, business project management community, there, having essentially the same discussion, saying we're going to take BPM, which we've worked on for 30 and 40 years, and now we're going to expand it more into some other areas, and we're going to integrate Socio-Tech into it and so on. And then I would ask them, what do you mean by BPM? Are you really clear about what you mean? And the problem, I bet that if we asked every individual person on the call, tell me exactly what you mean by AI and exactly how you think AI is different from automation and how it's related to organization design, et cetera, you would get a bunch of very different answers. And when you brought everyone together, there'd be a lot of confusion because people would be talking about fundamentally different things. So beyond the fact that Stu presented a lot of really interesting stuff for moving Socio-Tech forward, and we should recognize that, I think that it would be really good if we could define what we mean.
You know, if I did this slide set over again, Steve, I would, now that I've heard you say what you have said, I would have a section in the front about what AI is. That's a very, very good point. You know, we're focused on the organization, but we just assume that AI is AI.
Okay. Other thoughts about what you would like to delve into or what you would like to see more of or learn more about? Deeply
Hi,
into.
I can jump in for a second. Thank you so much, Stu. This was an amazing presentation. It's good to see everyone. Good to see you. What I'd like to see is a dialogue between organizational leaders who are implementing AI in this community. And I would actually, I'm thinking about how I might be able to facilitate that, but I think it would be potentially a helpful conversation. Thanks again.
Thanks, Larissa. Good.
I think out in organizations, the managers out there are really, they need help. I think they're enamored. The technologists are going in with their abba-dabba and doing all the AI stuff, and they're not quite, and then you got HR who doesn't know what the hell they're doing in terms of they're using old models and thinking they don't have a clue about social technical integration and human-centered AI. There's really a need right now for somebody to go in there and guide the system. When I did this work, it was wonderful because I generally work with the P&L owner, and I would work with whoever that P&L owner was, the CEO or the general manager. And what we would do is jointly work through the redesign of the system. And they need that right now. Somebody needs to be in there to help them do that, that has these kind of mental models in their head that could move it through. People don't exist right now that have that.
Stu, one of the things I'd be very interested to sort of delve into more is this question of language, because I think this has been a barrier for a really long time, and it's only getting worse. And I don't know what the solution is, but I think that is a very rich area for us to, really investigate and look at how because that's what the relevance is made out of, is the language we use to describe the application of socio-technical systems and so on. And it so often gets in the way. So I'm very interested, Bert, to your point about what do we want to look at more, would be this question of how we can reframe in a better way to connect more quickly, because often these things take really long conversations before you sort of get people on the same wavelength.
Let me mention something to you, just a personal experience. When I was at APC, we were doing these redesigns using this thing called social technical design. And we were getting fabulous results. And pretty soon the academics wanted to do case study on the results. And then I can't what's her name? Anyway, she started the Social Technical Systems Roundtable. This was back in the 80s.
And
Marjak, Ann Marjak.
Yeah, Ann started it. So I knew Ann, and I went to the second one, and a bunch of people were presenting, and they asked me to present, one of the redesigns. And I did that. And the next meeting, there were twice as many people. And the next meeting, there was twice as many people. And the next meeting, there was twice as many people. So what was happening is at the round table, the word got out.
Yep.
That's the place to go if you want to understand this stuff. And it's nobody like the academics and the practitioners and everybody were together and they were trying to figure it out. And they were talking about this technique and supporting each other. And it became a community that was learning together and creating this new model. I'm just saying, you might want to think about that because it was a very good experience and a positive experience. And I think it may be apropos to where you are now.
Thank you, Stu. We have a few people with their hands up, and I think the next one was Jakob. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure, I'll happily go. Thank you. This has been just an absolute joy. So very, very much appreciate it. And I appreciate you bringing up Agile, and this might be a problem for us to solve, but I have a fear with AI that much like years ago when Spotify came out with the tribes and squads model, it was something that organizations and tech organizations, particularly maybe not the most mature ones, but a large percentage of them said, hey, we should implement this tribes and squads model and let's use Agile and let's go for it. And so what I'm curious about is you're seeing an emerging framework that people are locking onto, because what you're describing makes sense. It's a process, right? Going through a socio-technical design is a process, and I'm aligned to it, but I fear that a lot of organizational and corporate leaders will be like, well, that sounds like a process. I need a very clear structure. And something like this squad and tribe model from back in the day, my fear again is someone's going to put a paper on that, and then everyone's going to start running towards that model. But I guess my question is, what have you seen? And maybe that's a sort of part of what you were describing as our reframing challenge we have in front of us.
Jacob, I really think you're right on target. Generally, somebody creates a shiny object and everybody moves towards it, and it's a problem. What I see is in Microsoft, they were jamming the STAR model into the work that the technologists were doing. They were just trying to use the STAR model as a way to design the human system. However, they did have some of the principles. The great thing about the human-centered AI community is that they've done a lot of work. You saw some of it, but they've done a lot of work on sort of what the criteria is and the baseline is. So all these shiny objects hopefully will align with that. The problem is that you got the agile people, and they think everything is agile, and I think what has to happen, and maybe the roundtable could do this, is that what you do is you do, in the work, in the work that I've done has always been developing products and systems through rapid iteration. I think that's what the roundtable needs to do. It needs to take all of these systems and constantly do this rapid iteration until it arrives at a system that is a design system that is pretty robust. I think some of the pieces I lined up here could be part of those blocks. I think the lab model, I think it's pretty strong. It's a pretty powerful model. I think this new model coming out of Stanford is a game changer. So I would add that onto it. And Jacob, you probably got some stuff that you've been doing too that you could add on to that. The point is that there's all these things happening, and somebody has to be the integrator, and the integrator as well as the iterator. Those two roles, integrating and iterating, is going to keep you way ahead of all these shiny objects and way ahead of these functions like HR that try to tell you this is the new Harvard Business Review process, da-da-da-da-da. Anyway, that's my reaction.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other folks, I want to make a comment. Valentina, can you see any more hands up?
Brian or Peter, I can't tell. Oh, and Wolfgang as well. They all have their hand up. I don't know who wants to go first.
Well, it would fit in very fine. I agree with you, Stu, with the big chance, with the organizational lack, the technology in front and the organizational lack. But I'm an old industry guy and with very old organizations using AI for nonsense. And so often in these old organizations, the power is in the wrong hands.
Right.
So the maturity model in itself is very fine. But I learned from Paul Toczynski, whole-scale change, and Kathy Dunnermiller. And the question is how to implement these elements, design labs, and so on, in such old hierarchical functional organizations.
Well,
since it's not the AI in itself, it's the AI to support any value creation anywhere. Our German Deutsche Bahn or the automotive industry or even Tesla. It's never AI in itself.
Right, right. What we've done in the past is that we brought the management team, the executive team, and sometimes even the board into the design lab.
Mm.
And the reason why is because when you're designing the new system, there's so many variances that are at their level that they need to control or eliminate. So they need to be part of the solution. They need to change the way that they're thinking. So they become part of the change process, not somebody sitting down above it and allocating what has to happen. They're engaged in actually creating the change and accountable for the results. So
I agree.
Any
okay,
other,
is that it?
Yeah, well, I'll pop in a little bit.
Good.
This isn't, like most of you, this isn't my first rodeo. We have done this before. One thing that has worked in the past, a bit of background, I started in Silicon Valley as a programmer, got my PhD from UC Santa Cruz, very interdisciplinary, and have been at that space. We hold events. I put a link to one at Dagstuhl, with German Computer Science Institute, at the computer science place, and I bring psychologists there, and that does the outreach. So this business of going where they are, and and we've done that all over the place. The other is to find a champion. The last big champion was U.S. National Labs that realized that people were using visualization badly. They didn't know how to design information visualization interfaces. So we got together, we wrote a book, Illuminating the Path, the Research and Development Agenda, a grand challenge. We brought that into the Department of Homeland Security. They gave us a Center of Excellence. I was on the leadership board. We got 30 million from them. The Europeans did their coordination action through the EU. The Germans did a DFG, Strategic Priority Program. We had a pretty good run. There's still some of these events going on. Eventually, the computer scientists will throw you out. They will appropriate your language and use it all by themselves to mean other things. But you do get 10 or 15 years of actual product out. So that's what I would suggest, events and a book.
Where are you located?
I'm in Vancouver. I was at the Vancouver meeting. I'm a professor at Simon Fraser University. Yeah, I'm not in the Bay Area anymore.
I'm actually here in Monterey, just down the street from Santa Cruz.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we used to go down. I used to run there for the Beta Breakers. But
oh, yeah, on for the Big Sur Marathon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Beta Breakers race, just Vancouver from Santa Cruz to, I think we only went to Capitola. We didn't go all the way to Monterey.
Yeah, Monterey is quite a long way.
Yeah, it's a long ride.
That's
anyway.
Great. I love what you just said, though. That's fantastic.
Stu, I woke up this morning with visions of sugar plums dancing through my head, as they say. And the sugar plums in this case was thinking back to when we did union management work and used the tool called interest-based bargaining or interest-based negotiation, where we really tried to understand, and really tried to understand perspectives and values that all the stakeholders were bringing to the table. And the way that intruded on my mind this morning was that we're in a similar situation now where the interests between the various stakeholders are not necessarily openly visible and on the table, and we're not dealing directly with them. And one of the ways that we were able to achieve some breakthroughs in labor management relationships 30 years ago was by being able to get that stuff out on the table. And as I'm thinking about artificial intelligence today, there's a very different perspective in the United States versus Europe versus China versus India versus the rest of the world in terms of interests and perspectives and power. And it seems to me that on a global basis, that's got to be one of the great struggles for human-centered artificial intelligence, is how do we get ourselves to the point that we're really grappling constructively but powerfully with these ideas of our varying interests, our varying perspectives, and the use and misuse of power in what we're doing. And I think what you've articulated is going to be very helpful to us in doing that.
That's the core issue. That's really the core issue. Yeah. And human-centered AI, I mean, is really trying to tackle that. They've done quite a bit of work. Every time I go over, I'm a block off the campus, but every time I go over there, the interesting thing is that most of the work is being done by other departments. For example, they had a couple of weeks ago, the law school was presenting, and they were saying, what happens if you implement AI and you kill somebody? Who do you sue? Do you sue the person who wrote the algorithm?
Yes.
Do you sue the, everybody's into trying to figure out, their cut on all of this. But the nice thing is that they're all coming together under this human-centered AI and basically saying the values of people, dignity, and all those other kind of values need to be front and center. And that's positive. But the problem is that the top 10% who have all the money don't want to do that. They want to be able to fundamentally increase their profits.
Yep.
Okay, guys.
Any other thoughts? We were about time to wrap up. I would just add one thing to this last bit of conversation, Stu, and I think that the notion of design labs is a continuous capability of organizations, whether it be through crowdsourcing or something that is more at the base, is critical. In order to overcome some of these silos between the technical and the social that Brian and others talked about, organizations need to adapt some form, something like the notion of a design lab, which is not a room. It's a organizational capability for integrating these aspects of the work system model in a humane way, an effective way. I think that is the key if they can shift into this more continuous design mentality rather than the notion of very periodic design.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's exactly the idea, is that the design lab is a reconfigurable capability.
Can
It
we
needs to be, it's not a room, it's a capability.
Can we hear from Terry? Hands up.
Okay. Somebody else wants to speak, and I just think we're close to wrapping up, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was next in line. First of all, really appreciate the model, Stu, and all the work that's gone into this. This fills in some nice gaps for me to bridge these gaps. I do think working in a design lab format on this, continuing to pull it together, is going to happen at the same time that we're doing continuous change models with companies, because they're not waiting for us.
Right.
Yes, we have to convince the senior executives not only of the value, but of the risk that they're leaving their butts hanging, to put it directly. If they're not paying attention to these things. But if we aren't doing both at the same time, what happens, as we've seen in the past, is it happens the system goes ahead, the culture goes ahead, and it happens very, very badly. So I think we have to figure out how to move quickly, both on the design of what's the design lab piece and the continuous change.
I agree.
They're synonymous, I think, in a lot of ways. Yeah. And is anybody else before we wrap up? Because there's some things we want to make sure that everybody is aware of so we can keep this conversation going. Anything else that Tony
Bert,
wants?
I was just going to say, when you were speaking about design labs as an organizational capability, what sprung to my mind is, and what I've been missing at the last roundtable, is experiential learning. And that is something which a lot of organizations just need. You need to rehearse these new human AI ensembles and partnerships and the collaboration and the way you relate to technology, and in order to build this muscle, which is human agency. And there's no other way than using our bodies and have this embodied engagement with this new organizational designs that are emerging at the moment, and that's something I would propose for the next roundtable.
You know, what's interesting in what you're saying is that the language that I'm hearing is that they're looking at AI as a partner. So in other words, when you're in this lab, you have all these human beings, but AI is sort of like, oh, that's one of our partners. So they're seeing it like, hey, we got to develop, we have a collaborative partner called AI that's in the room that's very powerful. So it's a good mental model that they have, I think.
Your partner may be a psychopath.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Anything? Thank you, Anya. Anything else that anybody wants to add? Okay. Well, Carly had to leave us, so she asked if I would work with Valentina to wrap this up with folks. I do want to remind people that Stu offered his email address. Again, orally, Stu, it's Stu Winby at here it is, stu@winby.biz. For anybody who wants to get a PDF copy of the slides. Valentina, are we also going to send out to all of the participants a link to the recording of this webinar?
Yes, and they will be also posted on our website under past events.
Okay, and that would be an opportunity for you to also give us some feedback further to the comments in the chat about how we should continue this conversation. We also have an annual general meeting coming up in December 11th. Maybe you could, yeah, okay. And this will be an opportunity to try to consolidate some of the ideas that you raised about how we can work together to change the language, reframe our work in a way that is more contemporary and useful for the current challenges and opportunities that we have. So I'd really encourage you to put this into your calendars and consider joining us at 9 a.m. Pacific time. That's a little bit earlier for the Europeans, but it's also a little bit earlier for us on the West Coast. We've, as Stu has sort of really provided us a tour de force, but which now we need to work with and try to realize the opportunities that are there if we can grasp it properly. Anything else, Valentina, before we close up?
Bert, if we can, just a kind of a meta observation. This is an incredible time for us. And if we lean into the resistance we may have for creativity and stay away from the fear,
right,
we can do some amazing things. This is a great time for folks who have STS perspectives.
Absolutely, yeah. All right. Anything else anything else inspiring somebody wants to offer?
Well, I mentioned in the chat the new date for the annual meeting, 22nd through 25th of September next year at Berlin. And given our issue of human-centered AI and Stu's presentation, I would like to inform you that the institution that is hosting the meeting is also the institution that is the sponsor for research on AI in Germany. And that human-centered AI will be one of the issues of the meeting in next September.
Terrific, Wolfgang. Great. All right.
Great.
All right, folks. Well, good to see you all. And let's keep the conversation going and take the challenge up. And thank you again, Stu, for your tour de force.